Perhaps the most complex calculation requirements for a forward rate agreement arise from a valuation exercise prior to expiration date. However, the process can be unpacked into a series of fairly straightforward steps involving basic TBM principles and timelines, and no truly difficult equations are needed. Let's try an example. We are going to be working with the situation at the bottom of the screen. This asks us to value a 2x5 FRA on a notional deposit of 10 million Rand with a fixed rate of 6%, 1 month after inception date. At valuation date, a 1x4 FRA is priced at 7.1% and the 4-month Johannesburg Interbank spot rate is 6.5%. All rates are simple interest, and we will apply a 30/360 day count convention. As usual, when dealing with the settlement or valuation of a derivative, it is convenient to anchor your point of view to the long's position. Then, the short's outcomes are easily determined because these have an equal but opposite cash flow or valuation to the amounts calculated for the long. The original 2x5 instrument refers to the period labeled in green, starting at T2 and ending at T5. The expiration date is 2 months after inception date, and the maturity date for the notional accrual period is 3 months later at T5. The significance of the 1x4 FRA that is selected as an appropriate valuation reference at T1 is that it has exactly the same accrual period. Consider the outlook if you are now standing at T1. A 1x4 FRA expires 1 month later at the indicated point and matures 3 months after that. Therefore, the 1x4 FRA at T1 has exactly the same accrual period as the original derivative. We now return to the original 2x5 FRA and focus on the fixed rate of 6%. A long FRA trader is obliged to pay fixed and receive floating. Therefore, at maturity date, the interest payable by the long is a fixed amount which can be calculated right now. Thus, we have 10 million Rand times the 6% fixed rate times the time fraction of 90 divided by 360 for a maturity date cash outflow of 150,000 Rand. This is all fair enough, but what about the floating leg receipt? At T0, or even valuation date T1, we have absolutely no idea what the floating rate is going to be in the future at the beginning of the accrual period. We do know that there will be a receipt of some amount at maturity, but we don't know how much it is. We indicate this unknown number with a positive X. Let's see if this unknown is going to be a problem. Obviously, we can't look into the future. Floating rates, by definition, are volatile, and so there could be a number of outcomes for what that rate is on expiration date. But perhaps there can be a workaround, so we will set the matter to one side for the time being. Now we turn our attention to valuation date T1. The key principle in valuing any derivative is to consider the consequences of an imaginary closing out transaction at valuation date. Because closing out is achieved by taking an equal but opposite position, we use a short FRA as the valuation reference for our long. When a long and a short derivative on the same underlying are combined, they cancel each other out, leaving only the value difference behind. Therefore, we use the 1x4 FRA with a fixed rate of 6.5% and calculate what the maturity date cash flow will be using the same notional amount of 10 million Rand. Bearing in mind that a short FRA is the fixed rate receiver and the floating rate payer, the short will accrue a cash inflow on the fixed leg of 177,500 Rand. For the short position's floating leg, we seem to have the same problem as before, in that we do not know what the rate at expiration will be. However, because we have used the same notional deposit and the same accrual period the unknown floating leg amount for the short has to be exactly the same as the longs, just opposite in sign. Therefore, we represent this amount with negative x. Because the imaginary valuation closeout is achieved by combining long and short positions for the same counterparty, we can now add the maturity date cash flows together because they belong to the same person. Notice that the unknown floating legs are cancelled out, leaving a net fixed leg receipt of positive 27,500 Rand. The final step is to present value this net amount back to valuation date using the applicable spot rate at T1 of 6.5%. We take care to use the correct time period, which is the 4-month difference between maturity date and valuation date. Because the original reference position was that of the long and the calculated amount is positive, the resulting valuation at T1 is a gain for the long.